the Night Nurse of Pinehaven. Good evening, dear listeners. Settle in close, turn down the lights, and let me tell you a tale that will make you question what truly walks the halls when darkness falls. This is a story about comfort in the most unexpected places, about kindness that transcends the boundaries we think we understand. This is the story of Margaret Holloway and the nurse who wouldn't let her be alone. The fluorescent lights of Pinehaven Nursing Home hummed their eternal song, that peculiar buzz that seems to exist somewhere between sound and feeling. Margaret Holloway had been listening to that hum for 3 days now, ever since the ambulance had deposited her here from St. Michael's Hospital, her hip still aching from the surgery that had pieced her fractured bones back together. 78 years old, and this is what it had come to. One moment she'd been reaching for a coffee mug on the top shelf of her kitchen cabinet, stubborn, independent, refusing to rearrange her entire life just because her daughter Sarah kept insisting she move things to more accessible locations. The next moment, the step stool had shifted, the world had tilted, and Margaret had found herself on the cold linoleum floor, unable to move, waves of pain radiating from her hip like ripples on a dark pond. The hospital had been a blur of white coats and beeping machines and that terrible chemical smell that all hospitals seem to share. But at least there, she'd felt like something was happening. Here at Pinehaven, in room 247, with its cream-colored walls and its single window overlooking the parking lot, Margaret felt like she was waiting, just waiting. The room was sparse, a hospital bed, her bed now, positioned against the far wall. A small nightstand with a lamp that cast a sickly yellow glow. A television mounted high on the wall that Margaret couldn't quite see properly without straining her neck. A bathroom she couldn't reach without calling for help, which humiliated her every single time. And beside the window, another bed, empty now, stripped of its linens, just a bare mattress on a metal frame. That bed was Mrs. Patterson's. The day nurse, a heavy-set woman named Brenda, had told her on that first day. Brenda had the kind of cheerful efficiency that seemed designed to prevent any actual conversation. She passed 3 weeks ago, 92 years old, bless her heart, went peacefully in her sleep. Margaret had nodded politely, but something about the information had settled in her chest like a cold stone. She was sleeping in a room where someone had died. Recently. She wasn't superstitious, not really, but the empty bed seemed to watch her with its absence. The days at Pinehaven were long and predictable. Physical therapy at 10 o'clock, where a young man named Derek would help her practice moving from the bed to the wheelchair. His hands careful and professional, but his eyes somewhere else entirely. Lunch at noon, the food was better than hospital fare, but still had that institutional blandness. Her daughter, Sarah, visited in the afternoons when she could get away from work, bringing magazines and worried smiles and a dozen suggestions for what Margaret should do once she was well enough to leave. "You could move in with us," Sarah would say, not for the first time. "Just temporarily. Or, well, we could talk about making it more permanent. The kids would love having Grandma around." Margaret would smile and nod and deflect, because the last thing she wanted was to become a burden, to be the old woman sitting in the corner of someone else's life. But it was the nights that were the hardest. The nights were when the silence grew teeth, when the fluorescent hum seemed louder somehow, more insistent. when the shadows in the corners of the room deepened and shifted and made Margaret remember that empty bed, that woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had died right here in this very room. On her first night at Pinehaven, Margaret had lain awake until nearly 2 in the morning, her hip throbbing despite the pain medication, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite catch. The night nurse, a tired-looking man named Carlos, had poked his head in around midnight to check her vitals, barely making eye contact before he'd shuffled back out into the hallway. The second night had been much the same. Carlos again, wordlessly checking her chart, adjusting her blanket with mechanical precision, then disappearing. But the third night was different. Margaret had been drifting in that strange space between waking and sleeping, her mind playing tricks with the darkness when she heard the door open. Soft footsteps entered the room, quieter than Carlos's heavy tread. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. A woman stood beside her bed. She was young, or at least younger than Margaret, perhaps in her early 30s. She wore a crisp white nurse's uniform, the old-fashioned kind with the structured dress, and the small cap pinned neatly to her dark hair. Her face was gentle, with soft features and kind eyes that seemed to catch the dim light from the hallway. "How are we feeling tonight, dear?" the nurse asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached out and patted Margaret's hand with a touch that was surprisingly warm. Margaret blinked, confused but somehow comforted. I'm all right, I suppose. Hip aches a bit." "That's to be expected," the nurse said, her smile reassuring. "You've been through quite an ordeal, but you're doing wonderfully. So brave." The nurse checked the IV that Margaret no longer had, adjusted blankets that didn't need adjusting, and generally moved around the room with a practiced grace. There was something soothing about her presence, something that made the shadows seem less threatening. "I haven't seen you before," Margaret said, her voice thick with drowsiness. "Are you new?" The nurse smiled. "I've been here quite a while, actually. I work the late shift. Most patients don't see me." "Well, it's nice to meet you," Margaret murmured, already feeling herself slipping back toward sleep. The nurse's hand on hers was so warm, so real. "Rest now," the nurse whispered. "I'll check on you again. You're not alone here." When Margaret woke the next morning, she almost thought she'd dreamed it, but the memory was too vivid, too clear. The nurse had been real. She'd felt her touch, heard her voice. At breakfast, oatmeal and weak coffee delivered on a plastic tray, Margaret mentioned it to Brenda. "Oh, you must have met Carlos," Brenda said, marking something on her clipboard without looking up. "He's our night nurse." "No," Margaret insisted. This was a woman, young, dark hair, wearing one of those old-fashioned uniforms, very kind. Brenda paused then, her pen hovering over the paper. She looked at Margaret with an expression that was hard to read. "Mrs. Holloway, we don't have any female nurses on the night shift, just Carlos. He's been our only night nurse for the past 2 years." Margaret felt something cold trickle down her spine. "But I saw her. She spoke to me. She held my hand." Brenda's smile was professional, sympathetic, but there was something else in her eyes. Pity, perhaps, or concern. "Sometimes the medications can affect us in unexpected ways, dear, especially at night. It's nothing to worry about." But Margaret wasn't worried. Not exactly. Confused? Yes. Uncertain. But when she thought about the nurse, about her gentle touch and kind words, she didn't feel afraid. She felt comforted. The day crawled by, physical therapy with Derek, who told her she was making great progress while barely paying attention. Lunch, a visit from Sarah, who talked about her son's soccer game and didn't notice that Margaret's mind was somewhere else entirely. Dinner, the evening news on the television she couldn't quite see properly. And then finally, night fell again. Margaret lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. She told herself she was being foolish. Brenda was right. It had probably been the medication, or a dream, or some confused combination of both. But even as she thought this, she hoped that the nurse would come again. The clock on the wall ticked past 10, past 11. Midnight approached, and then, so quietly she almost missed it, the door opened. The nurse stepped inside, her white uniform almost luminous in the darkness. She smiled when she saw Margaret was awake. "You're still up, dear," she said softly, approaching the bed. "Can't sleep?" Margaret's heart was racing, but not from fear, from something else. Relief, maybe. Validation. I've been waiting. They told me you don't exist." The nurse's smile faltered just slightly. "Did they now?" "Brenda said there's no female night nurse, just Carlos." The woman settled into the chair beside Margaret's bed with a sigh. Up close, Margaret could see more details. The nurse's uniform was indeed old-fashioned, the style from perhaps the 1960s or 70s. Her name tag read E. Patterson, though the first name was too small for Margaret to read in the dim light. She wore no jewelry except for a simple silver watch on her wrist. "People often don't see what they're not expecting to see," the nurse said quietly. "Tell me, Mrs. Holloway, does it matter whether others believe in me as long as I'm here for you?" It was such an odd question, phrased in such an odd way, that Margaret didn't quite know how to answer. "I suppose not," she finally said. "But are you real? Am I losing my mind?" The nurse reached out and took Margaret's hand again, and the warmth of that touch was undeniable. "You're not losing anything, dear. Your mind is sharp as ever. I'm here, aren't I? You can feel me. That's real enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the nurse's thumb moving in small, soothing circles over Margaret's knuckles. "Were you really a nurse?" Margaret asked. "Or are you something else?" "I am a nurse," the woman said, and there was pride in her voice. "I've been a nurse for, longer than I can remember. It's who I am. It's what I do. I take care of people who need someone in the night." "The night is the hardest," Margaret whispered, surprised to feel tears pricking at her eyes. "It's so long and so quiet, and I keep thinking about that empty bed, about the woman who died here." The nurse's grip on her hand tightened just slightly. "Mrs. Patterson," she said softly. "Evelyn. She was 92. She lived a full life. She was a nurse, too, you know. Worked at this very facility for 30 years before she retired, before she came back here at the end." "You knew her?" Something flickered across the nurse's face. "I did. Very well, in fact." "Was she alone when she died?" The nurse shook her head. "No, dear. She wasn't alone. Someone was with her, holding her hand, just like I'm holding yours. No one should be alone in the dark." Margaret felt some of the tension leave her body. "That's good. That's good." They talked for perhaps an hour, though time seemed to move strangely in that room. The nurse told Margaret about the building's history, about how it had been built in 1962, about the gardens in the back that bloomed beautifully in spring. She asked Margaret about her life, her children, her late husband Robert, who had passed 5 years ago from a heart attack. "Do you think he's waiting for me?" Margaret asked at one point. "Robert, I mean. On the other side?" The nurse smiled. "I think the people who love us never truly leave. They're always close, in one way or another." When the nurse finally stood to leave, Margaret felt a pang of disappointment. "Will you come back tomorrow night?" "If you need me," the nurse said simply. "Rest now, Mrs. Holloway. You're doing better than you know." The next day, Margaret mentioned the nurse again, this time to Derek during physical therapy. "That's weird," he said, helping her shift her weight. "I mean, there's definitely no nurse like that here. Maybe you should mention it to the doctor. Sometimes after surgery, people can have really vivid dreams." At dinner, she mentioned it to her roommates. Well, no, she didn't have a roommate. That bed was still empty. Would they ever fill it? Or was this room somehow unlucky now, tainted by death? She mentioned it to Sarah when her daughter called that evening. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mom, are you taking all your medications? Is someone checking your doses?" "I'm not confused, Sarah. She's as real as you or me." Okay, I believe you. Maybe I should come by tonight, stay with you for a bit." But Sarah didn't come. Something came up with the kids. It always did. Margaret told herself she didn't mind, but the loneliness settled over her like a heavy blanket as the sun set and the shadows lengthened. That night, Carlos came by first, around 11:30. He was his usual taciturn self, checking her vitals and her medication dispenser with barely a word. Margaret watched him carefully, noting his height, his build, his male features. There was no way she could have confused him with the nurse. No possible way. After Carlos left, Margaret lay in the darkness and waited. 15 minutes passed. 20. Had she imagined the whole thing after all? Had 2 nights of vivid hallucinations somehow convinced her they were real? And then, there, the door opening so softly, the white uniform, that kind face. "Hello again, dear," the nurse said. "I see you're still awake." "I was waiting for you," Margaret admitted. "I told people about you today. They think I'm crazy." The nurse settled into her usual chair. "Does that bother you?" "Yes, no, I don't know." Margaret struggled to sit up a bit more, wincing at the pain in her hip. "I just want to understand. Who are you? Why do you only come to me? Why doesn't anyone else see you?" The nurse was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was distant, thoughtful. "Do you believe in ghosts, Mrs. Holloway?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. I never have," Margaret said slowly. "Not really. I always thought when we die we just go somewhere else. Heaven, maybe, if you believe in that sort of thing." "And what if somewhere else isn't so far away?" the nurse asked. "What if the people we were, the purposes we served, they linger, especially in places like this where so much life and death intertwine?" Margaret's mouth went dry. "Are you telling me that you're a ghost?" The nurse, E. Patterson, according to her name tag, smiled sadly. "I'm telling you that I'm still a nurse. That's all I've ever been, even now, especially now." "Mrs. Patterson," Margaret whispered, the pieces clicking together in her mind. "Evelyn Patterson, you're the woman who died in that bed. You're her. Not as an old woman, but as you were when you were young, when you were working here." The nurse didn't deny it. Her expression was gentle, accepting. "I spent my whole life taking care of people. 30 years in this building. then more years in other facilities. When I came back here at the end, when I was the one in the bed, instead of standing beside it, it felt wrong, backwards. I was supposed to be the caretaker, not the one being cared for. "So you stayed," Margaret said. "After you died, you stayed." "I stayed," the nurse confirmed. "Because there are people like you, Mrs. Holloway, people who lie awake in the dark, in pain, afraid, alone, and I can't bear it. I was never able to bear it. So yes, I come to you at night. I hold your hand. I remind you that you're not alone, because that's what nurses do." Tears were streaming down Margaret's face now, though she wasn't sure if they were from sadness or something else entirely. "I'm not afraid of you." "I know," Evelyn said softly. "Most people would be, I think. But you understand, don't you? About loneliness, about wanting to still matter, to still have purpose." Margaret nodded, unable to speak. "Your daughter wants you to move in with her," Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to be the old woman taking up space in someone else's home." Evelyn leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "Margaret, listen to me. You are not a burden. You are a mother, a grandmother, a person with value that has nothing to do with what you can or cannot do for others. Let them love you. Let them care for you. That's not weakness. That's being human. But you," Margaret started. "I'm different," Evelyn interrupted gently. "I had no children, no family waiting for me. My purpose, my identity, it was always tied to this place, to being a nurse. So when death came, I suppose I just held on to what I knew. But you, Margaret, you have people who love you. A whole life outside these walls. Don't waste it being stubborn. I stayed because I had nowhere else to be. You're staying because you're afraid. Do you see the difference?" Margaret closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling over. "I'm so scared of losing myself, of becoming someone who needs help with everything, of not being me anymore." "You'll always be you," Evelyn said firmly. "A fractured hip doesn't change that. Age doesn't change that. Needing help doesn't make you less than you were. It makes you human." They sat together in the darkness, ghost and patient, nurse and frightened woman. Evelyn hummed something soft and old-fashioned, a lullaby from decades past, and Margaret felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since the fall. "Will you stay?" Margaret asked, her voice drowsy. "Until I fall asleep?" "Of course, dear," Evelyn said. "That's what I'm here for." In the days that followed, Margaret thought long and hard about Evelyn's words. She mentioned the nurse once more to Brenda, who gave her that same pitying look and suggested speaking with the facility's doctor about adjusting her medications. Margaret didn't bring it up again after that. Let them think what they wanted. She knew the truth. She also called Sarah and told her that, yes, maybe moving in, just temporarily, might not be the worst idea. Sarah had cried with relief, already making plans, talking about converting the downstairs guest room, about how much the kids would love having Grandma right there. Evelyn came every night for the next 2 weeks. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, the ghost nurse's hand warm in Margaret's. They discussed everything from old movies to the meaning of life to whether the cafeteria's attempt at pot roast was criminally bad or just regularly bad. "I'm going to miss you," Margaret said one night, about a week before her scheduled discharge. "When I leave here, will I ever see you again?" Evelyn smiled. "I'll always be here, in this room, in these halls. But you won't need me anymore, Margaret. You'll have your family, your life. That's as it should be. I needed you, though, Margaret said fiercely. These past weeks, I needed you, and you were here. I was honored to be here, Evelyn said quietly. You reminded me why I do this, why I stay. Not every patient is ready to believe, to accept, but you saw me. You let me help. That's a gift, Margaret. On Margaret's last night at Pinehaven, Evelyn appeared as always, her white uniform crisp, her smile warm. But there was something different in her expression, something final. You're going to be all right, Evelyn said, taking Margaret's hand one last time. You're going to go home with Sarah, and yes, it will be an adjustment. Yes, there will be hard days. But there will also be good days. Days with your grandchildren. Days watching the sun come through the kitchen window. Days of being loved and cared for, not as a burden, but as a blessing. How do you know? Margaret asked. Because I've been doing this a long time, Evelyn said with a soft laugh. I've learned to recognize the ones who will thrive and the ones who will merely survive. You, Margaret Holloway, are a thriver. Thank you, Margaret whispered, for everything, for seeing me in the dark. Thank you for letting me still be a nurse, Evelyn replied. Even now, especially now. The ghost stood, straightening her uniform, adjusting her cap. Someone new is coming to this room next week, an elderly man transferred from the hospital after a stroke. He'll be frightened, alone. I'll be here for him too. Good, Margaret said, smiling through her tears. That's good. Evelyn moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Margaret, when you get to Sarah's house, put your coffee mugs on the bottom shelf. Just this once, let practicality win over stubbornness. And then she was gone, slipping out into the hallway like moonlight, like memory, like the kindness that doesn't die, even when the body does. And so, dear listeners, Margaret left Pinehaven the next morning, wheeled out to her daughter's car with her small bag of belongings and a story no one would believe. But every night, in room 247, a nurse still makes her rounds, still holds hands in the darkness, still reminds the frightened and the lonely that they are not alone. Some hauntings, you see, are not curses, but blessings. Some ghosts don't frighten us, they comfort us. And some spirits refuse to rest not because they're tormented, but because their purpose is too strong, their compassion too deep, to let a little thing like death stand in the way. This has been the Night Nurse of Pinehaven. Sleep well tonight, dear listeners, and remember, even in the darkest hours, someone may be watching over you. Good night.